Hey, I'm Dean Karnazes, the UltraMarathon Man, and you're listening to the Physical Performance Show.
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Listeners, welcome to another episode of the Physical Performance Show. I trust you've been having a great week and out there looking to perform and pursue your physical best. This is a theme that certainly today's guest, UltraMarathon Man Dean Karnazes, touches on, the pursuit of our physical best. So you're going to really enjoy today. It's a significant episode indeed. I hope you've also been enjoying the previous guests that have appeared on the Physical Performance Show, appeared audibly, if there's such a thing as that. Last week we featured Matt Poole, who shared very earnestly around his slog of a decade to come away with the coveted maiden Nutrigrain Ironman series title. So Matt took out the 2016-17 Kellogg's Nutrigrain series, pipping Shannon Eckstein on the line for what would have been Shannon's 10th title and what was Matt's first title. So quite a story. If you missed it, go back, have a listen to Matt Poole. You're going to really take a lot from Matt's interview, including some fun stories around his adventures with Red Bull up a mountain to the point that he broke, and also some training insights and some great insights into what it takes to really hit peak performance. So that's Matt Poole, episode 57. Jump back, take a listen. And prior to that, we featured Kia Melverton, Australian swim team member, sharing around her journey of now making 2 Australian swimming teams. Today's show, as always, is lovingly brought to you by POGO Physio. POGO Physio is recognised as Australia's first practice offering fixed fee and unlimited access physiotherapy programs. We deliver outcomes, and we term those outcomes physio finish lines. We help our clients go from in pain or injured back to their physical best, and we do this with certainty of cost and certainty of outcome via our unique 7-step process and our unique 2, 6 and 12-week finish line programs. The philosophy is real short and simple. We want you to get the best treatment that you can actually benefit from, as opposed to what so often happens in our industry, getting the treatment that you can afford on a session-to-session basis. They're worlds apart. People that complete our 2, 6 and 12-week finish line programs get far, far, far more in value in terms of services and what they pay for. And you know what? We love that because it gets people back to their physical best. If you'd like to get more details, jump over pogophysio.com.au and there you can read up and check out the finish line programs. Massive thank you to the listeners who, as always, are generously sharing reviews of the Physical Performance Show. In particular, this week, a big thank you to Rocket Roger. And Rocket Roger rated the Physical Performance Show 5 stars. And Roger said, I'm a recent listener and tracking through the list thanks to Moners, that would be Steve Monaghetti, who featured previously on the show, sharing it on social. For an Aussie abroad, really enjoying the variety of guests and hearing from those who are in Maine under the public radar. So many learnings and insights, but equally consistencies across the spectrum. Keep it coming. Rocket Roger, thanks very much, mate, for the review. Really appreciate it. And listeners, if you'd like to join Rocket Roger and leave a review, I'd appreciate it. And also people out there that are yet to discover the program who would likewise benefit from it would appreciate it. So by leaving a review, it has the one effect of helping this show get more prominent on iTunes, which helps more people discover it and enjoy it and take the learnings from it. And it's real simple. If you jump over to your desktop, click ratings and review inside iTunes, there you can rate away. 1 star if you think it's okay, 5 stars if you're really enjoying it. So a massive thanks to you, Rocket Roger. And from one rocket to another, this week's guest is a prolific athlete in terms of his accomplishments. I feel I need to touch on some of the significant accomplishments to do today's wonderful guest justice. As you know from the top of the show, today's guest is Dean Karnazes, and Dean is best known as the UltraMarathon Man. Dean's physical accomplishments are many, and they include running 350 miles continuous in 80 hours in 2005 with no sleep. That's right, no sleep. And also incidents of sleep running, including some out-of-body experiences that Dean speaks about through the rigours of running 350 miles continuous. Dean's also been the winner of Badwater Ultramarathon in 2004 and has had 5 top 10 finishes in the Badwater event. And for listeners that are interested in Badwater, it's run through the hottest region of the world in the back deserts of California, and you can refer to a previous guest of the show, Sam Weir, who shares around his preparation for Badwater. But Dean has won that event. Incredibly impressive. Dean's also run 4,800 kilometers across the US that is, from Disneyland to New York in 75 days, averaging 65 to 80 Ks a day. He's single-handedly completed the relay, a 320 kilometer run from Castelloggia to Santa Cruz 11 times. Sorry about the pronunciation there. Dean's also run a marathon to the South Pole in minus 25 degree temperatures without snowshoes in 2002. And probably the event or the undertaking that put Dean on the international spotlight or international stage was Dean's 50 marathons in 50 days in 50 states of the US, which he completed in 2006. Off the back of these incredible endurance feats, Dean has also authored numerous best-selling books, including UltraMarathon Man, 50 Marathons in 50 Days, and Run 26.2, Stories of Blisters and Bliss. And more recently, Dean's most recent release is The Road to Sparta. And we speak today about The Road to Sparta. I've just finished the book, thoroughly enjoyed it. We dive deep into some of the learnings from the book today. Fascinating read for any listeners out there. And Dean's books, I'm an author myself, and I know what it takes to output a book, but Dean's books have gone on to be translated into 16 languages. So he's an incredibly gifted guy who shares very generously. What an impressive bio. And we cover so much in this episode today with Dean. We could spend hours, but Dean shares around some key insights into his world, his training, his philosophies, some of his key principles. He shares on how he got started on this journey of being the UltraMarathon Man. And Dean also touches in on the significance of going home to Greece, a moment at the Acropolis where it really arrested him and really changed in many ways his course thereafter. We also speak about Dean completing the grueling Spartathlon, finishing with King Leonidas' statue, and we also touch on what it takes to output a book like The Road to Sparta. So listeners, I know you're going to love this episode with the UltraMarathon Man, Dean Karnazes. Let's jump right in. This is an absolute pleasure, and joining me today I have none other than Dean Karnazes, or as I like to refer to him now, Konstantin Nicholas Karnazes. So Dean, welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having me on.
Dean, there's so much we could cover, and so, in the scheme of it, little time, but I want to throw you something a little bit fun straight out of the gate, and that's, what's one thing that scares you, Dean?
Having a teenage daughter.
How old's your daughter now, Dean?
Which is, she's in her late teens, and it's been challenging and scary.
So she keeps you on your toes.
Yes. She wants to date, and she says, these boys don't want anything, Dad. And I'm like, yes, they do, because I was a boy at that age, and I know exactly what they want, and and they're not getting any. So,
oh, Dean, well, I'm the father of two beautiful young girls, 4 and 10 months, so 4 years and 10 months. So I'll take some notes, mate.
I wish you luck. Be strong.
Oh, thanks, Dean. Dean, you've spent some time in Australia. Reading your latest release, which is an incredible read, listeners. Highly recommend it, Road to Sparta, and we'll touch on that through the call today. But I was intrigued to read that you actually spent some time down under as a field exchange student for the US. And at that stage, Dean, you weren't doing much running, you were doing more surfing. What were you up to at that stage of your life?
Well, to give the full backstory, I grew up in Southern California. I'm a California guy. And, of course, Australia has legendary surf, and I was a big surfer. So I applied for this ambassador program, this exchange student program, thinking I would never be accepted, and I was accepted. And I was sent to Australia. I lived in the northern beaches of Sydney, up in Mona Vale. And school became, let's just say, optional. If the surf was good, I was in the surf with my other friends, with my mates from Australia. They were equally dodging school. So spent a year surfing and traveling a whole lot. I traveled all around Australia, South Australia, Victoria many times, Queensland many times. I never got to the Northern Territory or Western Australia, but since then, I've been back to Australia probably 5 or 6 times.
Yeah, so you've got a large fan base down here, Dean. And do the Aussies all call you Karno? Do you give me permission to call you Karno?
Yeah, they all do. No, I can't even pronounce my last name. Karno's a truncation of Karnazes, so yeah, it's I mutilate my last name as well, so Karno's fine.
Oh, it's such an Aussie thing to do, isn't it? And Dean, going even further back, and you touch on this in the Road to Sparta, you always showed an affinity for some ultra endurance, even at the age of 14, running 105 laps, the equivalent of a marathon distance for charity. That was at school, right? Can you give listeners a little bit of an insight into what I found that to be a very interesting story?
Well, the school was having a fundraiser, and most students were collecting $1 per lap, and it was a standard track, so a 400-meter track. And people were collecting, pledging $1 per lap. And most of the kids, and I was 14 years old, like you said, most of the kids, did 10 or maybe 15 laps. So they got a lot of money for the school. It was all for charity, for the library. But I got it in my head that I wanted to run the equivalent of a marathon, which was 105 laps. So I set about running this marathon, and it was excruciating. I couldn't believe how difficult it was. I was there on that track for probably 4 or 5 hours after all the kids had left. There was just a handful of people standing around cheering me. And I remember I was virtually delirious. But I completed 105 laps. I'll never forget walking through my neighborhood, knocking on people's doors like, "No, you owe me $105."
And what was the school's response and your classmates?
They were astonished. I mean, the people that stuck around couldn't believe what I was doing. And, I was kind of going in and out of consciousness. As you know, when you're really pushing the envelope, I was fairly out of it. But there's some teachers there, and this is way before, social media, so no one was really recording anything. But they were just blown away at what I was doing. And, for the next, week, I could barely walk. But people... they applauded me when I walked in the classrooms and everything, yeah. And
can you recall approximately how long it took you to get around the 105 laps, Dean? Obviously, you're 14 years of age, so you're not looking at one of your numerous sub-3-hour marathons here, are you?
No, I mean, I would say it was, not faster than 5 hours and not slower than 6 hours. It was probably somewhere, right around 5 hours and 10 minutes or something. I wasn't keeping a hard track because I never thought it would be anything beyond just a story.
Well, Dean, I mean, at 14 years of age, it's outstanding. I think I thought 5Ks was a long way at 14. So, mate, there's always perspective, isn't there? Dean, from school, you had an affinity for cross country, never really the track per se. And then, from my understanding, Dean, there was a big pause. Obviously, you spent time in Australia, as you say, chasing the waves, picking up the nickname Karno. And from this period, sort of, there was this abstinence from running until the age of 30. And I know it's a story you've told many times, but could you briefly share around what happened on your 30th birthday? You've been quoted as saying, you could live a life of desperation or set course into the night. And on the eve of your 30th birthday, that's exactly what you did. So can you give us a brief insight into what happened that night?
Yeah, so, the listeners, you understand I was passionate about running as I was a youngster. But after that marathon, I basically gave up running altogether. And I went through college, and then I went through, what we call graduate school, and then I went through business school. I got an MBA. I was, had a very comfortable corporate job in San Francisco. I was making a ton of money. I had stock options. I had a company car, all the perks. But I was fairly miserable. I mean, I didn't feel whole. I felt, I didn't feel natural going into business meetings. It felt like someone else's life, not a life I wanted to lead. Lo and behold, I ended up in a pub on my 30th birthday doing what anyone should do on their 30th birthday, and that's get properly drunk. Or as you obviously pissed as a lizard. Yeah, so I was in there with me mates, and we were drinking, and right around midnight, I said I was leaving, and they said, "Well, why are you leaving? Let's get another round of tequila. I mean, it's your 30th birthday." And I said, "No, I'm going to run 30 miles right now to celebrate my 30th birthday." And they looked at me and they said, "What? You're not a runner. You're drunk." And I said, "Yeah, I am, but I'm still going to do it." So I walked out of the pub in San Francisco, and I pulled off my pants. Luckily, I had these silk boxers on. They were kind of comfortable to run in because I didn't even own running gear at that point. And thought, just run south. There's a city called Half Moon Bay that's 30 miles down the coastline from San Francisco. I thought, just run there. Just go there. And that night, forever, that drunken stumble through the night forever changed the course of my life.
And it really did, and it has, hasn't it, Dean? I mean, at that stage, could you ever have imagined running that marathon into the night to Half Moon Bay, home of the famed Maverick Surf, which is another story for fellow surfing fan, that your life would turn out as it is? I mean, it's just been an incredible journey, hasn't it, to date?
And it keeps every time I think, wow, it's just been incredible. 20 years of living, it just keeps snowballing. I mean, I keep getting these incredible invitations to exotic places all around the world, and my life still blows my mind. I mean, I can't believe I've run, and raced on all 7 continents of Earth twice now. It's just insane, and I never could have foreseen it would come to what it is right now. Nor did I ever think I'd be a successful author. I mean, I can't believe the success of my books, because I thought I was writing about such an obscure subject that it wouldn't appeal to anyone. But my books have found an audience.
Mate, they absolutely have, and I must say, I'm a avid reader. I love reading, and I've read many books of all different genres. And mate, The Road to Sparta, your latest release, I was on a plane to Sydney to record an interview with Chris McCormack, Australian Ironman triathlete, winner of the Kona Ironman. Yep. And your book was on the bookshelf there at the news agency, so I grabbed it. I thought, this would be a great guy to connect with, Dean, on the podcast. I've followed your journey for years, and mate, I've read it, and it is such a well written read. I wanted to ask you, did you know you had that literary skill in you, or you must realise that you've got a real gift, right, with the output of words.
I mean, I think, and Chris McCormack must realize he's got a gift with being such a champion. I mean, writing is like Ironman or ultramarathoning. It's grunt work. It's 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration. So your words are so kind to me, because I've really struggled as a writer. It's been a hard thing for me to learn, and I've perfected my craft just through tireless work. Sitting in front of a computer and just rewriting a single sentence 15 times until you get it right. And it's like I said, it's kind of like training for an Ironman. You can never do enough. You can think you put in enough base miles, you can think you've cycled enough pool time or open water time, but it's just never quite as good as you want it to be. And
I find that fascinating. It's a bit of a it's a summary of life in many ways, isn't it? The greatest outputs, as you say, are 99% sweat and 1% inspiration. But mate, I think certainly Road to Sparta. Let's go there now. I mean, Dean, the journey of this book, and the journey that you went on as an individual, a lover of obviously ultra-marathon running, and also the rekindled love with your country of origin, Greece. I was astounded, Dean, to read that you hadn't been back to your place of birth, so to speak, for, I think you quoted 4 decades in the book. And you write beautifully about that moment when you arrived in Greece, fresh off the back of a Chicago marathon outing. You were highly fatigued, but you write in the book that you caught a glimpse of the Acropolis and something happened within you. Can you give listeners an insight into what happened that day as you arrived in Greece?
Sure. And, to give a true insight, we need to rewind the clock about 32 hours because that's when I finished running the Chicago Marathon. So I ran the Chicago Marathon, didn't even have time to take a shower, hopped into a cab, flew to the airport, got on a flight for Greece, missed my transfer in Amsterdam, sat in the airport for another 5 hours before I can get a flight out, finally showed up to Greece, right around sunset. Completely jet lagged. I just can't sleep on flights. Sore from just having run a marathon, and all I could think about was getting to my hotel room and just crawling in bed. Just pull the blind shut and go to sleep for a while. And as I was pulling the blind shut, I just peered out the window, and perfectly framed in the distance was the Acropolis. And I know this is cliche, but it sent chills down my spine. I saw this up there, and I thought, my God, I've got to go there. So I put my running gear back on, and I ran up to the Acropolis. And as I got there, the sun was setting, and I turned toward the setting sun, and I was by myself. I was completely alone, and I had the most profound sense of divinity I've ever had. It was as though, it was the weirdest thing. It was as though I was meant to be standing in that very place at that very moment in time. And I can't describe it any other way. I've never felt like that before, and I haven't felt like that since. And I doubt many people ever feel that way. And I know that if I'd never gone to Greece and ran up to the Acropolis on that day, I never would have felt that way as well. So it was really a powerful moment, and I tried to capture it in the book. But it's not something a lot of people, I think, can relate to because it never happens. And it just happened to be that for some reason I ended up in the right place at the right time, in the right moment in the universe.
Well, I mean, you're right that it was so beautifully written. For a suspended instant, time didn't just stand still, but seemed to move in reverse. Like the sand in an hourglass flowing upward, history rewinding. I had come home. And what do you think it is? Is it something that, it's more than a feeling, right? You use the word often primordial. Is it a primordial instinct of just a knowingness, do you think, that this is my place of origin?
I think it is. I really do. And, scientifically, there's no way to really, prove what happened. But I think exactly what you said. I mean, I'm 100% Greek, by ancestry. And, I don't know what else to say. I'd grown up in California. I'd lived overseas. I lived in Australia. And I traveled all around the world, but I'd never been to Greece. And when I got to Greece and that happened, it just melted me. I couldn't, there was no perspective. It was just, my head was a whirl. But it was a beautiful moment. Yeah, and I think it just has to do with my roots were there. And, one day, 2,500 years ago, a fellow runner of ours, a fellow marathoner, ran right to that spot I was standing, thrust his arms into the air and proclaimed Nike, Nike, or Nike, Nike, which means victory, victory. We are victorious. And then he died on those stairs. It was a special moment.
And that is a great, segue into the story of that runner that you mentioned, the day-long runner, whose name was Phidippides. And, in modern marathon culture, Dean, we all recognise that the marathon is meant to be the story of Phidippides running from the Battle of Marathon back to Athens to proclaim victory. But until I read Road to Sparta, Dean, I believe that to be the entire story, but there's so much more to the story of Phidippides, isn't there? Would you mind sharing around the real story of Phidippides?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we'll rewind the clock now 2,500 years ago to 490 BCE. And that's when the Persians invaded Greece. And they landed, ironically, at this big coastal plain that was filled with fennel. Wild fennel grows all over Greece. And the word marathon, the literal translation means field filled with fennel. So they landed at this field filled with fennel, which is Marathon. And the Athenian, the people that were like watching on patrol realized that the Athenians were going to get slaughtered, because there's about 50,000 men from Persia that landed on the shores, and the Athenians had about 10,000 men. So they said to this guy, Pheidippides, who was a hemerodrome, which meant a day-long runner, they said, you must run to Sparta. And if you've seen the movie 300, who's the most badass fighting force in ancient Greece?
The Spartans.
This is Sparta. So Pheidippides set out to run to Sparta from Athens to recruit the Spartans. Now that's 153 miles. So he ran and got there within what we think is 36 hours. The record says that he left one morning and arrived before sunset the next day. He got to Sparta. He talked to the Spartans. The Spartans said, yes, the Athenians are our brothers. We're all Greek countrymen. We will come to assist you, in battling the Persians. However, we can't leave for 6 days because the moon is not full, and our religion it prohibits us from leaving for battle until the moon is full. So now Pheidippides is standing there thinking, well, the good news is the Spartans are coming. The disappointing news is they're not going to deploy for 6 days. I've got to go tell my men the situation. So he turned around and ran back to Marathon, another 153 miles. And then the battle was fought, and then he ran that final marathon to the Acropolis.
It's just absolutely incredible. And to put listeners in perspective, Dean, I had no insight into this, and I'm sure many of the modern day marathon fans and community around the world are the same. And this isn't just running 153 miles on a motorway, a well-paved course. Can you give us some perspective of the rigors of that run in terms of terrain and environment and other obstacles he would have had to have overcome, including the pressure of the situation, the magnitude of what was at stake?
Yeah, it's in after, and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. After kind of recreating and doing this very run, or actually even half of the run he did, it's inconceivable how someone 2,500 years ago was able to pull this off. Because one, it's southern Greece in September, or actually in August, when it's just roasting hot. He's running, in most likely barefoot, and the terrain there is intense. It's mountainous, it's rocky, it's undulating. So, there's 3,000-foot climbs when you climb Mount Parthenion, but along the way there are many, many speed bumps. So you're just basically climbing and descending the entire path. He would not have been able to carry water. He probably would have had a goat skin bladder, and that would have been the extent of the water he carried. He would have to forage for food, so he'd forage for wild figs and olives, which grow abundantly in Greece. But that's the types of foods he would be eating. And to think how he was able to do this when, I had my modern, ultra running kit on and struggled, it's an incredible accomplishment.
And he would have, I think his sight there, Dean, he was potentially late 20s. He wasn't a teenager. He wasn't in his later decades. He was at the peak of his fitness. He was the hand-picked, guy for the mission, right? He was an incredible athlete, obviously, to get that terrain covered in that time. Such an insight. But this profession, I guess it was, of, I'm not sure of my pronunciation here, Dean, but herodromai, what's the origins of that? Why did the Greeks need people to run messages versus, say, horse, sending it via horse back then?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the reason is that a trained hemerodrome, or you can just see drome, there's a hemerodrome could outrun a horse. And Pheidippides, the literal translation of his name is "spare the horse." Wow. Because, why kill the horse when this guy can run there just fine? And ironically, I've actually run a 100-mile foot race against a horse in the Vermont Trail 100-mile endurance run. I've beaten a horse over 100 miles, so I know it can be done.
Yeah, just incredible. Absolutely incredible, isn't it? And Dean, you obviously as part of this project, getting back to your Greek roots of origin, touching down in Athens, the Acropolis moment, had a lead-up event that took you to what grabbed you to be this Spartathlon, the recreation of Phidippides' run from Athens to Sparta, the 135 miles. Dean, this event, you write prolifically about it in the book. It was a real test for you, wasn't it? I mean, it was a test on many levels. What was the most... Before we actually dive there, can you give listeners a bit of a perspective on the origins of this race and the significance of it?
Yeah, so the Spartathlon race, and I imagine some of your listeners have heard of the Spartathlon. It's a recreation of the run that Phidippides did. So it starts at the base of the Acropolis and finishes in Sparta. And it's 153 miles. It has very aggressive cutoff times. For instance, you have to be at mile 50.22 within 9.5 hours, or you get cut from the race. And you don't want to be there anywhere close to 9.5 hours because you're constantly under pressure to get to the next checkpoint before the time runs out. So it was an elite field the year I did. It's always an elite field because it's very hard to get into this event to qualify for it. And there were 350 runners, and typically about a third of the starters even finished the race. Can you imagine Ironman where, a third of the starters, two-thirds of the people do not finish? Yeah, and I wanted to try to put myself in Phidippides' shoes, if you will, or in his sandals. But I decided I was going to only use the ancient foods that he would have eaten to see if I could get through this thing, just eating figs and olives and cured meat like a beef jerky and something called pastili, which is ground sesame seed and honey. And I only drank water as well. I didn't use any sort of sports beverage, no salt tabs, nothing to assist me beyond those simple foods.
And Dean, that worked well, I believe, for 75 miles, and then things took a turn, right?
Well, I had a bit of an oversight. I would go out on these 6 or 8 hour training runs in California eating, just figs, and that was fine. But what I found is when you eat figs for 24 hours straight, you create some issues. I mean, why do doctors tell you to eat figs? Because if you want to be regular, eat a fig. And when you're running 153 miles, you don't want to be regular. Yeah. So, my guts kind of went south and completely shut down, and I couldn't stomach any food for 75 miles. So I got through basically the last half of the race just drinking water.
Wow. And the end of the race, it's a unique finish. There's no finish line tape. There's a statue of King Leonidas, right? So what was that moment like, Dean? This is you're right about it being an emotional race for you. Of all the incredible ultra challenges you've done, 50, 50, 50, the marathon adventure, the 350 miles continuous, this one sole 135 mile run played a great tax on you. You were unwell going into the race. You write about that. You were sick heading into it and interrupted preparation. The pressure of being a bit of a Greek hero amongst your nation of birth, and then you get to the finish. And can you put us in the picture of what was going through your head as you arrived in that town square of Sparta there as you came up to the finish? What was going through your head and what was that finish like, Dean? Can you give us some perspective?
Yeah, and you did a very good job of describing kind of what went down. I mean, at the start of the race, I had high expectations. I trained like crazy, and I'm thinking, okay, go for top 10, if not better. Well, things didn't go as planned, and I started unraveling, and at a point, it just became. You've got to finish within 36 hours. That is your challenge. Under normal conditions, I might have dropped out, but I just defined dropping out as not an option. Death before DNF, I was telling myself. Mm-hmm. That was the mantra I was repeating, death before DNF, death before DNF. I was willing to do whatever it took to get to Sparta. I was either going to end up in an ambulance, or passed out on the side of the trail, or I was going to get to Sparta. So when I came up that final stretch, you can imagine, how emotional it was for me. It wasn't a good race. It was a horrible race. Yeah. And I think that's what makes the story more interesting. I mean, if it had been a good race, I would just be a standard race report. I hit my split. Everything went well. But that's not what happened at all. As I came running up the road in Sparta, I saw this towering bronze statue of King Leonidas. He's the guy in 300. This is Sparta. And how you finish the race, as you said, is you run up and you touch his bronze feet. And when I did that, my emotions let loose. I mean, I weep like a child. And it was a very poignant moment. And I must say that every single finisher I saw coming in after me, it was the same thing. I saw guys and women touch his feet, and their knees would buckle and they'd pass out. I mean, it was like meeting the Pope. I mean, it was amazing, amazing finish. And if you're an ultramarathoner listening to this, and you've ever thought about doing the Spartathlon, I just say you must do it. It will change who you are.
Wow. I mean, Dean, I've been a runner, a triathlete for many years, and I have to say I've done a 50K race, lots of marathons, New York, different marathons, and I've never had the impetus, I've got to say, Dean, before Reading Road to Sparta, and it's a stage of my life, I'm a young dad with some girls and things, but I've never had the impetus to do an ultra, 100K or 100 miler. But mate, I've got to say, after Reading Road to Sparta, you've changed something within me. So it's now something that's like, wow, maybe whether it's for the Spartathlon or not, I'm not too keen on seeing these snakes that you described, Dean, on your reconnaissance runs where you saw snakes in the hills of Athens that were, of Greece there, that you quote as being the length of park benches and as fat as eggplants.
Yeah, well, I've run across Australia and talk about snakes.
Yeah, they're not as fat as eggplants.
You got some snakes down under there. Yeah.
So nothing for me to be afraid of. But mate, yeah, it's really sparked something in me. So hopefully anyone listening in that picks up Road to Sparta will have a similar revelation. And Dean, you've spoken about this probably from your end ad nauseum in what you do, the mindset of an ultra marathoner. But there was something in Road to Sparta that I found fascinating. You write that when you get highly fatigued, your mind doesn't go dull. At times it's the opposite. It becomes more acute and attentive. Can you share a little bit about your experiences in the Spartathlon, completing the Spartathlon, in terms of that?
Yeah, I mean, when your body what I believe is when your body starts to deteriorate, your mind compensates because it knows you're in a weakened state. And I think it's just that primordial fight or flight response. So you start tuning into everything. And this is, for instance, when I ran 50 marathons in all of the 50 United States in 50 days, people say, it must have been a blur, like you must not remember this and that. I remember every single footstep in every single marathon. I remember conversations I had with people, the shoes they were wearing, the clothes they had on. So your mind gets hyper astute to things. And in the Spartathlon, that happened tenfold. I just was so acutely aware of my surroundings and so perceptive of what was going on, and so there and present in the now that I was able to write the book on recollection, just on remembering moments that happened along the way with crystal clarity.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, you expect the opposite, but what you've written around and your experience is it's not the case. And I mean, Dean, beyond the Spartathlon, some of the other side notes from the book I found it fascinating. You sharing around the thinking and the philosophy, if you like, that the Greeks really built their culture around, and that is that there's a nobility in the pursuit of performing at your physical best and also intellectually. And, you write about at the start of the book your late grandfather, Gus Gibbs, and your late grandfather, dying from suffering a heart attack, and, dying prematurely for what could have potentially been his full lifespan due to ill effects of westernized living. Mate, as someone that's got such a platform, is there a key message that you'd like to see, nations embrace that has been birthed out of your, reflections on the Greek philosophies around living?
Well, I mean, I as a young kid, I just was incessantly moving. I was always moving, always working out. I remember doing push-ups when I was, 8 or 9 years old. And I had a really regimented diet as a young kid. I was primarily a vegan. I cultured my own yogurt. As I got older, I became basically westernized, even though I was, born in California, and started eating junk food. And when I started running again, I gave up all the junk food and went back to this constant movement, never stop moving. Training is life, life is training, and a really clean diet. And I will tell you, the quality of life is so much better. The mental clarity, you feel good about your body, you feel more respectful of your body. And that idea that you said, of the Greek ideal of arete, which is perfect alignment of mind, body, spirit, I think is really important for achieving happiness. And I know here in America, and you've got a problem in Australia as well with obesity and childhood obesity. It robs your life. Mm-hmm. What can you say to people to get them to change? It's hard to say anything. What you can do is lead by example. So it's the same thing that I did as a father. What I learned is, as soon as I tell my kids something, they do the exact opposite. So I thought, don't be a preacher, just do what you love, and naturally that will shine through to them. So when people, I give talks at schools across the country and across the world. I've given many talks in Australia at schools, and I don't preach to these kids. I encourage them. Let's go. Let's go on a fun run. No one's being timed. It's all about inclusion. Let's celebrate each other's, struggles, because, some of the kids struggle much harder to run a kilometer than other kids. But I think the idea of reincorporating movement and, intellectual stimulation as one, kind of like the Greeks did in their, gymnasiums, which were basically schools inside a gym where, the students worked out all day as they were receiving lessons. I think that idea, even though it was 2,500 years ago, is very relevant today.
Yeah, it truly is. I mean, you're right that the Greeks believed that our physical strength was the soul manifested through the body. That's, having a strong body foretold of a pure soul. And it's one vehicle, right? And I think you really live that and lead that, Dean. And certainly anyone that's seen you realizes that, your physique's, remarkable, incredibly lean, and also, muscular. The bit that jumped out is your calves. Obviously, it's a family trademark per se. And I did laugh out loud when, you referenced being recognised in Australia all those years ago, like we touched on at the start of this interview. Can you give listeners, it's just such a great story, a brief recap of how you got recognised by family because of one of your physical attributes?
Yeah, I mean, so again, I'm 15 years old. I'm shipped off to Australia. I'm a foreign exchange student for a year in Australia, and I'm walking around Sydney with some of my friends. It was in board shorts. I mean, it was hot. It's summer in Sydney, and some lady notices my legs, and specifically my calves, and just knew from the shape of my calves that I was a Karnazes. And she happened to know a friend of a friend that was my great aunt. So my grandfather's sister, who had immigrated from Greece to Australia. As you know, there are a lot of Greeks in Australia. I think, beyond Athens, Melbourne has the second highest Greek population of any city. So I've got a lot of relatives in Australia. But she noticed my calves. She told my great aunt, and my great aunt was able to track down who I was and got in touch with me. And that's how our family was actually reunited. I mean, once my grandfather immigrated to the U.S., he completely lost touch with his family. He didn't know where his sister was. She ended up moving to Australia, and her friend's friend noticed my calves, and that's how we reunited with lost family.
Yeah, well, it's such a story. And listeners, you've got to go there, pick up the book, have a read. It's amazing to think you can be on the other side of the world and recognised by your calves. And, you're right that they're potentially reflect the result, Dean, of your family running around the hills chasing goats many centuries ago.
Well, in the village my dad's from, my grandfather's from, they still do. Not much has changed, yeah.
That's brilliant. It's brilliant. Dean, there's a lot coming up for you, but before we go there, I want to touch on a key part of every guest that we have on the Physical Performance Show, something we call, Dean, the performance round. So it's a little bit like an interval session. I'm going to throw you a question, throw me a quick response, and we keep moving. You ready for it?
I'm ready.
Your most loved training session, Dean?
It includes CrossFit, surfing, and long running.
Most disliked training session?
Speed work. I got to be honest, I hate speed work, but I do it.
What do you hate about it? I've got to ask.
Oh, it just hurts. It's just that sting. It's everything. Yeah, we all hate speed work, but that's why I love it as well.
Yeah, it's a love-hate. Favorite pre-race meal?
Greek-style yogurt, whole fat, no sugar added, with some cashews and maybe a banana.
Beautiful. Bedtime, morning time, fairly disciplined, or a bit flexible?
I try to let my body regulate itself. I don't sleep much, maybe 4 to 5 hours a night, but that's not because I've got an alarm set. I try not to use an alarm and let my body just self-regulate when I can. I travel so much and I've got a lot of commitments when I can't do that. But if I'm at home and I've got a training block, I just let my body do its thing.
Beautiful. Athlete you most admire, Dean, and why?
Well, how about I've got so many. I mean, the list is so long, but how about Craig Alexander?
Yeah.
I admire Craig because I know him. And, there's a lot of athletes that are champions, and you think, wow, this guy's amazing. You know their story, but you don't know him personally. He is a really solid bloke. He's a good guy, and when I see him, on the podium, it just makes me feel good.
Yeah, beautiful. Shout out to Crowie. Dean, the toughest competitor you've ever raced, who was it and why?
It's the guy I look at in the mirror every morning.
Good answer. Dean, is there a mantra that you, across all the events, the many decades of incredible physical accomplishments, is there one mantra that you regularly turn to as you're out there running?
I really don't use mantras, but I tell you, I did chant quite a bit on the Spartathlon, death before DNF.
Wow.
We all know what DNF stands for, right?
Yep. Did not finish. This is different in the Spartathlon.
Yeah. Did nothing fatal, right? Yeah.
Yeah, incredible. Do nothing fatal. Dean, best recovery tip?
Eat a lot of wild Pacific salmon and drink so much water that your pee is completely clear.
Keep it simple, right? Brilliant. Dean, this is a difficult question for you to answer, but I'll let you explain why. Your worst injury?
Well, it's a couple lost toenails. I've never had an overuse injury. I cracked some ribs one time on a fall when I landed on a rock on a trail, but that's not an overuse injury, and that healed pretty quickly. So just lost toenails.
Oh, mate, and I've got to come back to that after the performance round. How would you describe, Dean, being in the zone?
When nothing else matters but the present instant of time.
Wow. Last time you were in the zone?
Boy, on this last Sunday, I ran the Big Sur International Marathon, which is here in Monterey, California, and I put my head there quite a bit. So it was a pretty good race, believe it or not. So I was very tired. I had been traveling internationally, but anyway, Big Sur is a very it's a very difficult marathon. I finished. I looked at my time in exactly 8-minute mile pace. So not 7 minutes 59 seconds, not 8 minute 1 second. That was 8-minute mile pace, exactly on the nose. And I didn't plan it that way.
That speaks of the rigors of the event too, doesn't it? So, so you had to be in the zone by the sounds of it to get through.
No, yeah, you typically shave a half hour off your time when you look at your Big Sur marathon time compared to like a flat course.
Yeah, wow. Actually, I've noted that event, and the beauty of that area alone is enough of an impetus to try and get there one day. So thanks for flagging it. Dean, you're out of the performance round. Well done. Hopefully that wasn't taxing like some of your speed sessions. Mate, coming towards the tail end of our time together, I want to ask you a few fun questions, but also throw into what you've got coming up at the end of this year, 2017. Dean, what's on your bucket list personally and outside of sport?
I want to write a couple more books. So that's something I want to do. I'm also pursuing a graduate degree in ancient Greek culture. Wow. So I'm getting I'm very slowly. I'm taking online courses, but hopefully get a master's degree in that subject, and also to learn Greek. My Greek is atrocious, so to get more fluent in Greek.
Has that been really birthed out of your, Road to Sparta / Spartathlon project? Is that since then, or is this something that's predated that?
Yeah, no, it's been an outgrowth. I mean, since writing that book, I've been to Greece probably a half dozen times. I go back all the time now, a few times a year if I can. So when I'm there, and if I've had some ouzo, my Greek is really good.
You just flow with the culture. Dean, This is just a purely fun question. If you could have dinner with 3 people, living past, who would be at your dinner table and why?
Wow. Probably Phidippides. I'd love just to see what that reality was all about. My grandfather that I write about in the book, because he died, as you know, when I was just 1 year old. And you, Brad, you're a good guy. I've enjoyed this conversation, so we'll get together.
Well, mate, I think we could make that happen, and we could talk about your grandfather's stories. I'd like to know more about Gus, but Phidippides, we'll have to reference his story as well, Dean. But thank you, mate. I'm honoured. Will you wear your toga?
If you wear one.
All right, I must. I'll dig one out. Dean, there's something that I've heard you say, which really I think is a beautiful insight for runners and people out there looking to perform at their best, and that's, you've been quoted as saying, motivation gets you out of bed, but discipline keeps you out the door. Can you unpack that a little? Yeah,
people say to me, like, how do you get motivated? And you just must always feel like running. And come on, there are days when I have no desire to run at all, especially if I'm in a training block and it's going to be a hard day. But it takes discipline. I mean, it really does. Not everyone is self-motivated. People say, well, listen to your body. Well, if I was to listen to my body would say, sit on the couch and have a beer and order some pizza. Come on, that's the easy thing to do. What we're doing is not easy, and that requires just mental toughness and discipline.
A bit like writing the books.
Same thing.
Just showing up. And I mean, there's a beautiful phrase that I often refer to, or saying it's, let the pain of discipline work on you now so it can work for you later. It's it really is a force multiplier. But where does that come from within you, Dean? I mean, that innate discipline, is that something that's genetic for you, or where do you think that actually comes from? Because clearly it's a big driver of your achievements, both as an author, as an incredible athlete, and as a role model for so many people. Where does it come from for Dean Karnazes?
I think it goes back to the idea of arete, of bestness, like just trying to be the best that I can. When I look back and I'm ready to be buried in the ground, what will disappoint me is if I feel like I did not live up to my own expectations. So that is really what I strive to do, is just be the best that I am capable of being. And as a writer, it's getting better, but I think I keep improving. As a runner, I think I keep improving. So it's just the pursuit of personal excellence.
Dean, in reading Road to Sparta, I sort of picked up a thread that through your formative years up until this Spartathlon and race and your unearthing of Phidippides' journey, reliving it, that ashamed's not the right word, certainly not. It's the furthest thing from it, but that you didn't necessarily run towards your Greek heritage, and you cite that this concept of arete, the Greek concept of arete, is a real driver for you in getting out of bed and having discipline push you out the door. Do you feel that you can now only truly be your best now you've almost reconnected and embraced who you authentically are in terms of both your heritage and obviously you're aware of your gifts?
Yeah, I mean, I as I said in writing this book, I mean, I sought to learn about Phidippides, and in the process, I learned about myself, and I learned about my ancestry, and in the values, and the Hellenic pride and the culture that existed 2,500 years ago, and see that it is more relevant than ever in this very day. And the idea of personal bestness, of living up to the best that you can be, is, I think, the goal that every person should have.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I mean, it's heartwarming. My wife's from Portugal. She's Portuguese, and I've spent some trips back and forth to Portugal over the years. And, coming from Australia where, as you know, Dean, we're fairly removed from a lot of, other cultures. And so I really took a lot out of it reading around getting insight into the Greek culture and their celebration of life and zest for life, despite the hardships that, the current day Greece is experiencing. So I think you've probably really opened a lot of people's eyes as to the culture of Greece. So, mate, thank you for that. And
I think we should do one more interview, because I literally just last Thursday I just flew back from Portugal. I travel to Portugal all the time. The Road to Sparta was released in Portuguese, so I was in a place called Sintra.
Yes, fantastic. Were you running the marathon, Dean? I think I actually saw that. Did you run the Lisbon Marathon? Was that it, or?
No, it was like a trail marathon. Wednesday's a national holiday. It's kind of like Independence Day, or Anzac Day in Portugal. So it was a group run we did.
Ah, beautiful. And Portugal, what a nation. And talking about nations, Dean, from November 2017, this has been a 5 or 6 year project for you. Dean, you're about to undertake the most audacious undertaking of your career potentially, and that's running 200 plus marathons in a year. Can you give listeners a bit of a perspective on what you're looking at doing from November this year?
Yeah, so, going back to running 50 marathons in all of the 50 United States in 50 days, I want to do that same sort of thing globally. So I'm planning on running a marathon in every country of the world in a 1 year time span. So there's 203 countries, and I want to visit each and every one of them and run a marathon while I'm there.
Yeah, well, and you're doing this, you're not doing this on your own. You've got some backing from the US government, I believe, and also the UN, right?
Yeah, well, I was, last summer I served as a US athlete ambassador. So I was sent to Central Asia as a sports envoy. And I've been working with the U.S. State Department and the UN and trying to get the passports and the permits to get into all of these countries. And you're right, it's been a 6 year process. And honestly, I think it'll be a 7 year process, because I met with the State Department folks in Washington, D.C. Last Friday. And, with the new administration, things are changing. And the world's become, unfortunately, a little more conflicted since I conceived this thing. Countries like Syria, North Korea, Russia, it's not going to be easy to get into these countries now.
Yeah, and I mean, it's certainly a state of unrest, isn't it? So do you feel like November is still a realistic kickoff, or it's going to be potentially pushed back? I
can guarantee it's going to be pushed back.
Yeah.
And, people ask me a lot, do you ever fail? Well, with this one, I've been failing for 6 years. And I'll continue failing until I succeed. So it might take me 7 years. It might take me 8 years. And 8 years of failure will get me to success.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful, mate. Well, certainly listeners and, anyone that knows of this upcoming adventure, I think everyone's excited at the prospect. And in many ways, it's symbolic in this day and age. I want you to unpack, Dean, just in bringing this to a close, something that, you've been quoted as saying, and that I think's pertinent to our conversation there around some of the unrest in the world. Running can rise above it. What do you mean by that, Dean? Well,
I think any runner has sensed the power that running has to unite people. There's so many things in this world that divide us, be it the color of our skin, the God we worship, the language we speak. But running is a commonality all humans share. And I've become this global ambassador for running, and I can go to places like Portugal or Kazakhstan, and people show up to run with me, and we're as though we're one. It has a magical way of bringing out the best in people in this common thing that we all do as a species. And I think there's power in that, and I think the world could use something like that. It's a simple, naive act. It's placing one foot in front of the other, at an accelerated pace, but it has profound power to unite people. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to achieve during this global run.
And I think that's a beautiful way to bring this interview into a close, Dean. Certainly, in my work as a physiotherapist, I encounter people that have experienced the life-giving benefits of running and physical activity at large, and Dean, I want to say a big thank you for your time today amongst a very, very full schedule that I know you run. And secondly, a big thank you on behalf of listeners for the inspiration, mate, that you are to the running community and also the community at large. So, Dean, we wish you all the success with getting this next adventure off to a start. And, who knows, maybe Dean Karnazes will be the peace force between the US and some of these nations of unrest, right?
Well, I mean, I'm asking local runners to come out and run with me, so it's going to take more than Dean Karnazes to pull this off. So pick a couple countries and come join me.
Oh, I'd love to, Dean. Maybe Portugal and Australia. Dean, thank you very much, mate, and really appreciate it, and all the best for the rest of the year.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you, your wonderful voice, and I also appreciate the work that you do. In your clinic. You're doing God's work, so keep healing people and getting them back out and running.
So, there you have it. I trust, and in fact I know, that you enjoyed today's episode with the UltraMarathon Man, Dean Karnazes. What a great guy, an inspirational character for not just running, but also the world at large. And, as I shared on that interview with Dean, I haven't had a huge drive to ever really undertake myself an ultramarathon beyond the 50k coastal high that I ran here on the Gold Coast several years ago, but things have shifted in me after reading Road to Sparta. So if you're into running, in fact, if you're into performance, please do jump over and pick up the Road to Sparta wherever books are found, and jump over, follow Dean on social. And if you enjoyed it, please let Dean know something that you took away from the interview, something that you'd like to share from him, shared with Dean. Please let him know. And that'd mean a lot to Dean. It would also mean a lot to myself. You can tag us in. Our handles, I'm at Brad_beer across my social media handles, and Dean's, he'll be pretty easy to find as the UltraMarathon Man. Listeners, if you'd like to refer to the show notes, you'll find those over at pogophysio.com.au. And if you'd like to subscribe to the show, it's really easy. Just hit subscribe from within your app, and that'll automatically populate this program into your device each and every week, so you can enjoy the sharings of the guests. And massive thank you to the folks that bring this show to us: Daryl Misson, our audio engineer, and Susan Wilkin, our VA, who works behind the scenes to make sure everything is in place so that we can output an episode each and every week. If you've been enjoying it, please share it on with someone, maybe an ultramarathon runner or a budding ultramarathoner, and that'd be great if we can share the word and spread the love. And lastly, if you're into running, which I'm pretty sure you are, then be sure to jump over, check out my book, You Can Run Pain-Free. We've been talking about books this episode. It's now a bestseller on its own accord, so thanks to everyone that supported the project. And it's a book that's been written off 10 years of clinical learnings on how to help runners run without injury and pain-free. So that's available over on Amazon, and also now audibly via audiobooks or iBooks. So jump over and check it out. You Can Run Pain-Free. And lastly, if you are a runner who lives in Australia and you're looking for a marathon challenge of your own. We've just heard from Dean Karnazes around marathoning and the origins of the true marathon story. Then look no further than one of my favourite events. That's the Gold Coast Airport Marathon. It's held on the first weekend of July every year, and at the time of this show going live, that leaves us with a few weeks until the 2017 instalment of the Gold Coast Airport Marathon. You can enjoy the marathon, also the ASICS half marathon, right through to the Southern Cross University 10-kilometre race, and also the 5.7-kilometre race as well. So jump over to goldcoastmarathon.com.au and don't miss registering for this great event. It's a fantastic run with great support and beautiful scenery, of course. Coming up on next week's episode of the Physical Performance Show, I actually catch up with an Australian marathon legend. We have previously featured Rob De Castella and Steve Monaghetti, both Australian male marathon legends, and there's a gentleman that's almost like the missing person that forms the trio. Now, his profile may not be as prolific, but he's a phenomenal athlete on his own accord, and that's Mr. Pat Carroll. Pat's bio is impressive. Pat's actually been the 4 times winner of the Gold Coast Airport Marathon, a dual winner of the Sydney Morning Herald Half Marathon, and is still the current holder of the Australian all-comers record for the half marathon, running an astonishing 61 minutes and 11 seconds. That's right, 61 minutes, 11 seconds. Pat's finished in the top 8 at 3 Commonwealth Games, represented Australia 18 times, and also has the bragging rights of one of few Australian runners who have ever run sub 2:10 for a marathon, running 2:09:39 to win the 1995 Beppa Marathon. Pat's also a coach based out of Brisbane and shares some great coaching insights in terms of how to get the most out of your marathon campaigns on next week's episode of the Physical Performance Show. So be sure to tune in. Until then, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.